What have we been up to? Anything fun? I was sorely disappointed in my research today. Very in the research. 90% of what I could find was adverts for the stuff they sell. So I wasn't happy at that. But I found what I could. And then I thought, well, when people go to the mill, they comment. Most of the comments that we get when they come back from the mill back to us is about the flood markers. So, the shed's painted. I told you that last week, Caroline. Or are you painting yours? So, because people comment on the flood markers, I'm going to add a bit about the flood at the end. So, I'll give you what I've found so far for Johnstons. Well, pretty much all I could find, to be honest. The fabric mill was established in 1797. It's the same mill that produces the cashmere garments today, but originally used to make linen, flax, oatmeal, and tobacco. When Alexander Johnston took over the lease, he didn't buy it then, he took over the lease, he introduced textiles and phased out the original products. Oh, you've done it again. Cool. Well done, Caroline. I haven't even finished the first coat because my shoulders have been playing up. So, by 1810, Johnstons of Elgin had quickly and firmly established themselves as a leader in the wool industry. Estate tweeds, which were popularised by Queen Victoria, basically everybody that worked on the estate was given a uniform of some tweed or some tartan, so that everybody that worked for the estate was in the same outfit, basically. The estate tweeds basically is what made the money in the first place, because Queen Victoria and Prince Albert made them popular, so a lot of people with money wanted their staff on their estates to have tweeds that identified them as staff for that estate, so they all had a uniform. So, and they still produce the estate tweeds for some of the big houses that still have a uniform that aren't run by a separate company, and other estates too. The Industrial Revolution was the transition to new manufacturing processes. Started round about 1760 and rolled right the way through 1820 to 1840. Hand power was being replaced by machines, and working conditions improving. No longer would you hear the phrase the dark satanic mills, because usually at least once a week there'd be a coffin leaving the mill from one of the staff who was killed during work. Because back when it was manual, when a mill's running manual, if the threads you're working with, if one of them breaks, it takes too long to stop the machine, tie on a new bit of thread, and start the machine again. So you have to catch it while the machine's moving, tie it on so that you don't have to stop the machine. People who worked in old manual mills right up until the 1970s, as old people now, if they worked the machines with the looms and stuff, their pinkies will be that shape. Because you use your pinky to catch the thread, so that if you get caught, it's just your pinky, not your whole hand. So most of them end up with that, with their pinky that shape as the arthritis sets in when they get older. I always call it weaver's pinky, because it's how you came somebody that worked in the mills when it was manual. The Muckle Spate was the Great Flood in August 1829. Devastated most of Strathspey. It devastated pretty much everything from Bankery to Inverness. Murray in particular, some places were almost wiped out, but we'll talk more about that at the end. The 1850s were exceptionally significant to the Johnstons of Elgin story, with James Johnston introducing exotic fibres to the business, which led to the purchasing of their first bale of cashmere. Cashmere comes from cashmere goats. You can also get another type of cashmere from a pashmina goat. No, a pashmina is not the word for the scarf. It's actually the name of the breed of goat. So when you're saying you're going out, I'm good, thank you. When you're saying you're going out with your nice, lovely pashmina wrapped around your shoulders, you're basically saying you're going out with a goat wrapped around your shoulders. So, yeah. But they couldn't think of another name to call the fabric, and call the scarf. So it's like, oh yeah, let's call it a pashmina. It's an invented word. No, it's not. It's the name of the goats it comes from. They got their first bale of cashmere from a London supplier because by this time, the railway had made it to Elgin, finally. By 1851, they were pioneering the weaving of cashmere and vicuna. Now, vicuna, or vicuña, to use its actual pronunciation from where it comes from, it's a cousin of the llama. As you will have seen from the photos I put in the event page earlier on. It's about half the size of llamas. They're teeny weeny things, and they're really, really cute, going by the photos. But their fur, fluff, coat, whatever you want to call it, is pretty much the finest, thinnest natural fibre you'll come across. But it's pretty strong, which is why they use it. So 1851, they started using the fur from the vicuña. It's one of two wild species of South American camelids. So yes, it's part of the camel family. And it lives in the high alpine areas of the Andes. Once they had these fabrics, they decided they were going to exhibit at the Great Exhibition in London, the big 1851 exhibition. Anybody who's done O-grade history will have heard of this exhibition, even if you don't remember what it was all about. Because goodness knows, I couldn't remember what it was all about, but I could still remember what the building looks like that was built for it. So, at the Great Exhibition in London, Johnstons were awarded a medal for superb vicuna shawls. Throughout the 1850s, they showed their products at various exhibitions and were awarded prizes in excellence. This led to their pieces being exported across the globe. That's okay, Heike. Don't worry, you're here now. The picture of the family that I used on the event page was taken in the 1890s. It's James Johnston and the family. Since the founding of Johnstons, it's been owned by two families, the Johnstons for the first 4 generations, and then since 1920s, the Harrisons. Now you know who Harrison Terrace is named after. Edward Harrison. He was described by a worker, Donald Williams, who was working in the pattern shop. Harrison was keenly interested in everything. He was one of those people who was always ready to experiment, and it was this willingness which helped the firm in the 1920s at the height of the Depression. The invention of the motor car brought the production of their motor rug, one of which was presented to Ramsay MacDonald when he visited as Prime Minister. So they gave him one of his rugs. There was a fire at the mill in 1954, which I cannot find any information on whatsoever. The 1900s themselves brought many challenges to the mill, but they're proud to say they've survived 2 world wars, floods, which most of us know about, and fire. If you live in Elgin, you know Elgin floods from time to time. Not so much now, but it used to quite a lot. After the end of the war, their manufacturing concentrated firmly on fashion, with the design and production of fine cashmere and woolen accessories. The mill was visited by the leading fashion journalists of the time, including Vogue and the Sunday Times. In the 70s, the company expanded with investment into knitwear production in Hawick, in the Borders. They advertised to promote their tweeds, accessories, and garments to trade. In 1980, they opened the knitwear factory in Hawick with a staff of 8. 40 years later, they are the largest independent employer in Hawick with a staff of approximately 300. In 1981, Johnstons of Elgin opened their first retail store in Elgin, which has been visited by members of the royal family throughout the years, as well as prime ministers, including Maggie. In anticipation of the bicentenary celebrations, the book Scottish Estate Tweeds was first published. Born in 1918, Ned Harrison worked at Johnstons of Elgin all his life, with the exception of the years during the Second World War. Researching the Johnstons' records, he became keenly interested in the history of estate tweeds, and in this he follows his late father, Edward Harrison, who created the parent of the book, the Estate Tweeds book. Edward ran Johnstons for 46 years, from 1920 to 1966. Ned Harrison himself was chairman and managing director of Johnstons from 1966 to 1978. 2006, they opened the retail store in St Andrews. In 2008, the Courtyard Visitor Centre and shop opened in Elgin after they had the rejig and included all the courtyard and the old staff houses. In 2012, they opened a visitor centre and retail shop at the Hawick factory. 2013, they gained the royal warrant. Granted the royal warrant of appointment to the Duke of Rothesay, Prince Charles, as manufacturers of estate tweed woolen fabric by appointment to HRH, the Prince of Wales, Duke of Rothesay, manufacturers of estate tweed woolen fabric, Johnstons of Elgin, Moray, Scotland. December 2015, the flagship store opens at 77 New Bond Street in London. If you're going to make money in clothing, you have to be somewhere near Bond Street or Savile Row. The shop in London showcases their fine cashmere and woolen knitwear, accessories, and home interior ranges. You see what I mean? The whole thing's an advert, but it's all I could find. The current brand logo is taken from a design produced in the 1930s by Edward Harrison. The J represents the Johnston name and their core values since 1797. The thistle represents Scotland. And the B is the symbol of the craftsmen and women who use the latest technology to make every Johnstons of Elgin piece a timeless classic. So while it's all mechanised now, it's still very much traditionally done. They've only used the machines where they can speed up a process. They haven't switched to like doing it all on computers and blah, blah, blah. There's still a lot of it that's done in the traditional way. The machines are only used to speed up the process. 2018 London Fashion Week, Friday the 16th of February 2018. Johnstons of Elgin hosted its very first presentation at London Fashion Week to an international audience. The brand made its debut in central London, presenting 15 women's wear and 5 menswear looks. Under the stewardship of creative director Alan Scott, Johnstons of Elgin Autumn-Winter 2018 collection was a statement of British luxury and original provenance. 2019, the Edinburgh flagship store opened in April 2019. New flagship store in the capital, located on Maltrees Walk. I don't know where that is in Edinburgh. It's in Edinburgh's luxury shopping quarter, which is probably why I haven't come across it, because that's not me. I'm not into luxury shopping. The new space covers 2 floors and will house the latest women's wear, menswear and homeware collections. That's the advertising over with. They're the only manufacturer in Scotland to maintain the capability to take natural fibres in raw state through every stage of the process up to a perfectly finished jacket, scarf, whatever. So they actually get the shearings, the pelts, when they've shaved the sheep, when they've shaved the vicuna, the fabric as it is, the raw material, is delivered to Johnstons more or less as it comes off. And they do everything from the cleaning, the carding and everything, right up to making the finished thing. That's why their stuff is expensive. I've had a shot at carding wool from its raw state to getting it to a spinnable state. It takes hours. So that's why it's so dear. Not just the fact that it's got like cashmere and vicuna and merino and stuff in it. It's the time it takes. So yes, there are machines used to speed up the time, but it still takes ages to get it done properly. Celebrating the skills of their own craftspeople and generations of herding communities from Mongolia, China, Afghanistan, Australia and Peru, and of natural fibres reaching their full potential. They bring the raw fibre to the mill on the banks of the River Lossy, where they clean and soften it with the purest Scottish water. I never thought I'd hear the River Lossy described as that, but hey-ho. Spinning, weaving and knitting cashmere, vicuna, merino and lamb's wool in the only vertical process mill in Scotland. Johnston pioneered the use of tweed for camouflage, and the style became known as the Scottish estate tweeds, which is of course what carried them through the 20s and 30s so that they could still exist and still have an income. Johnston's mill carries out the process of dyeing, spinning, weaving and finishing all in one place, thus making it the only place of its type. The contemporary Johnston's mill uses cashmere from China and Mongolia, lamb's wool from Australia. The company has 5 retail locations in the UK: Edinburgh, Elgin, Hawick, London and St Andrews, and allegedly, because I couldn't find anything to back it up, Nantucket in the States. Allegedly. I don't know for sure because I couldn't find anything to agree or disagree with it, but it's what it says in one of the books I was checking. That is pretty much all I could find. That would make sense, Gordonston's uniform coming from Johnston's. That would absolutely make sense because they're always kilted. Gordonston's always been kilted right since the 80s that I know of. What comments have we got on the other page? Hello, everybody who's watching. I'm good, thank you, Adele. So, now, because that only covered 18 minutes. Okay. What do I myself know about Johnston's? Yes, it's very old. Yes, there was already a mill there. I can't find anything about the earlier mill, apart from that it produced the different things as opposed to the fabrics. I do know some sections of the building haven't been updated. They are still functional, so they haven't needed to be updated. But I know one of the bathrooms that I used when I worked there, I was only there for a very, very short time, but one of the bathrooms I used in the factory, the vending machine for the ladies' things was a vending machine from the 1950s or 40s because it was 2D if you needed to buy monthly things out of the machine. So, yeah, it didn't work. Now I would presume there is a modern one there, but Little touches like that are left over from the 40s and 50s always attract my eye. I know their flood protection barriers up until they finished the flood protection stuff in Elgin itself. Johnstons flood barriers were the best in the area, which sadly is how Kings Mills and Lossy Cottages and everything got so badly flooded back in 2005-ish. Because the water hit Johnston's barriers and bounced off into the housing estate. So the factory was good. There was some bits and pieces, yeah, but the house I used to live in had 4.5 foot of water in the living room, which is why I say used to live in. There is one in Nantucket. Cheers for that, Jennifer. It's a funny place to think. You know, you would think when a company's branching out into the States, they're going to go New York, Chicago, Florida, New Orleans, Dallas, because of the oil connection. But Nantucket? What's in Nantucket? Has anybody been? Does anybody live there that's in here now? I know there's obviously going to be people who live there and people who have been there, but is any of them in the room at the moment? I'm going to have to do a Google Street View and find the Nantucket one and have a look and see what they do. Because I would imagine it's a completely different range that they would sell to compare with what you'd find in the UK stores. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Right. So I looked up a wee bit on the Muckle Spate, which is the worst flood Elgin's ever had. It's the worst flood ever recorded in Scotland, actually. So I'm going to read you an account of the Muckle Spate, which some of you might be familiar with. You might have already read it. You might even have the actual book it comes from. I haven't yet, but it's on the shopping list. So the Muckle Spate was the worst flood in Scotland's history and far beyond. Happened in 1829 here in Moray. Largely explained in those days as a calamity from the hand of God and likened to Noah's flood. That year, a summer sun shone hot from a July sky onto the Moray Plain, just as it had done all summer, wilting newly planted shrubs and trees. Haymaking was over. Littering the farmyards were golden stacks covered and weighted down, providing winter fodder for stock and hiding places for cats and kits, broody hens and rats. Wheat, beer barley and oats were swelling in the fields, ripening almost complete. They would soon make their own stacks. A good grain harvest meant no one would go hungry during the long dark months ahead. Even without the new full belly crop gaining in popularity every year, the potato. Yes, in 1829, the potato was new to this area. I'll do that bit at the end, Jennifer. I'll tell you the wee bits that I know of. So the potatoes would be harvested in autumn, but they were new to Moray in 1829. In a tradition stretching back beyond memory, the men of Moray and their families besides, from the Spey to the Nairn, from the highlands and plains, prepared for harvest. As they sharpened their sickles, amongst other things, they talked of the latest outrages and extravagances of Georgie Porgy, King George IV. Little did they know he would be dead in less than a year, and good riddance would be the general consensus. And then there were the rumours of newfangled machinery that could each do the work of a dozen men. Once almost cut off from the rest of the nation by the Grampians, lairds from the south, new roads and new bridges were opening the floodgates to admit ideas from a world beyond. Some young people had joined a growing exodus to start a new life in Nova Scotia on the other side of the ocean. Yeah, they are cute, aren't they, Heike? Heike's just googled the vicuña to have a look at them. She's agreeing that they're really cute. And so it was late on the Lord's Day, you can tell it was written in the 1800s, of August the 2nd. The wind swung round to the northeast, rifling the waters along the funnel of the Murray Firth. Squally showers began to fall. Old fishermen and farmers alike felt the first stirrings of unease. By Monday of the 3rd, the weather's temper had blackened into a malevolent gale, whipping up a maelstrom of driving rain and discharging it in torrents over the hills and plains. The cloud lowered to meet the land, and all through that day the air was so filled with water and spray that those outside could do nothing but to breathe it in. No roof could keep it out. No window facing northeast could withstand it. Fishing boats dared not venture from their harbours. Farmers realised if this were to continue, the harvest was about to be ruined. By mid-afternoon, the major rivers had all started to rise and swell, with the wind shrieking like a demented demon and water seeping and dripping through every chink and crevice. Houses began to flood from the force of the rain alone. Animals went unfed. In the hills above the plain, people began to abandon their dwellings as the gloom of the day faded to a night. A tumult of water thundered down all the major watercourses of Murray. The worst affected being the River Findhorn. At the Broom of Moy, at the mouth of the Findhorn, all houses were swept away and their occupants drowned. As that dreadful night of August 4th gave way to day, the full extent of the devastation became apparent. All watercourses and tributaries up in the hills had been affected. Gushing torrents reinforced by all manner of debris and detritus undermined the riverbanks, cutting new channels and spilling far beyond their normal limited courses. 2 floodstones at Randolph's Leap are still a testament to the water being 50 feet above its normal height. Resonating with news reports of today, occupants of flooded properties were forced to seek shelter in garrets and attics. The Spiny Loch to the north of Elgin had been drained 19 years previous, was once more filled to capacity. 20 square miles of the fertile forest plain was under attack by a thrashing, foaming brown monster. 5 fishing boats sailed from Findhorn across the floodwaters, rescuing a stranded population in dire peril. Much of the new infrastructure which had just been completed, turnpike roads, harbours, and especially the bridges that had so recently transformed and opened up this northern land, were smashed, broken, washed away during the afternoon and night of the 3rd and 4th. Bishop Mill, Findhorn, Forres, and Fochabers, to name just a few. Imagine the chaos nowadays if those bridges were to suddenly become impassable with no warning. In those pre-electricity days, mills provided the power for all industry. They were the threshing mills, the flour mills, mills for the textile industry, the brewing industry, to name a few examples. These were especially vulnerable to the flooding, with the mill leads, machinery, buildings, and products all being carried off. It was reported a huge mass of machinery was swept 9 miles downriver from the Fulling Mill. Now, it's a Gaelic word, Faille. Honestly, don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce it, but it was the Fulling Mill from there. Elsewhere, a whole shearing shed with a year's shearing of wool was carried off by the water. Produce from the land, whether harvested or not, was destroyed, with soil eroded and washed away. Animals, both wild and domesticated, suffered dreadfully, being either chilled, drowned, or swept away. The rain finally stopped late that morning, after which the floods had begun to subside, leaving in their wake destruction and destitution. For wily opportunists, there was a bonanza of salmon stranded in pools, together with mountains of driftwood to be collected for burning. But many were left without shelter, belongings, or the means to feed or provide for themselves. A central committee for the flood fund had to be quickly established for the relief of cases of utter destitution. The parish of Forres alone recorded as having 188. One of their lasting legacies was the minting of silver medallions as an honorary reward for those who were judged to have shown courage and humanity in the disaster. Each member of the boat crews who braved the dangers of the floodwater to rescue those in need were awarded a medal engraved with their name. A few years later, a lengthy, light-hearted poem in the vernacular and the Doric-ish, titled The Muckle Spate, describing the floods, was written by David Grant. In it, he describes at length the nature of the debris swept away by the floods. There's a wee example of it here, and I'll apologise now for my pronunciation. And divots, thack and timber lums, and rantle trees wi' crooks and buckets, baith for a's and salt, and racks for plates and books, and barn fans and flails and fleers, and cannises and secks, and cheeks o' doors, and doors themselves, wi' broken bands and snecks. So some of the stuff that he watched being swept by was chunks of earth, thatched roofs, timber house frames, buckets of all different kinds, plate racks, bookshelves, whole sections of barns, farming machinery. Not that most of it was actually mechanised machinery, but you know what I mean. Floors, sections of buildings, sacks presumably containing grain and provisions, door frames, doors themselves, broken roofs, all sorts going past. And then it goes on to give a little modern reminder. Should such a calamity befall us today, in this age of plastic, the debris and detritus would inevitably be considerably different. Now, instead of all that wood and stuff, you might be watching, I don't know, cars, caravans, wheelie bins, road cones. I remember the big one that made me move house. There was some barrels from the Glenmurray distillery stuck under Bishop Mill Bridge, which meant the police had to babysit them until somebody had actually got them out of the water. We owe a debt of gratitude to one Sir Thomas Dick Lauder of Fountainhall, 7th Baronet, 1784 to 1848, and friend of Sir Walter Scott, which is probably why he felt he had to document stuff. Sir Thomas collected a great many accounts of the flood from all the affected locations and incorporated them into a book called The Great Murray Floods of 1829, which is still in print. So write that down if you want to read more about it. He was married at Aidenkilly Church, and he was the owner of the Relugas estate, which is next to Finhorn. He naturally focuses to a great extent on that area, being that it was his land. Furthermore, he describes some of the consequent flood alleviation schemes at that time following the disaster. together with the accompanying difficulties. And then the last wee bit I've got for you. Famous for his portrayals of Highland scenes, some years after, in 1860, artist Sir Edward Landseer, 1802 to 1873, depicted the disaster in his painting The Highland Flood. What other comments have we got here? Oh, Heike says apparently they've got vicuña in Hellebronn Zoo in Germany. But apparently it's a huge zoo, so of course. She also says, not sure what's worse, fire or water. Water has such a force behind it. Yeah, it does. Water is what made the Grand Canyon. I think water is worse. Fire is quick and a fast devastation. Water will wear away until eventually the house subsides. Yep. Randolph Sleet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, there is. I mean, the plaques in Johnstons themselves now. Johnstons is mostly old buildings, and it's big, high ceilings because of the machinery that was in there. And most of the plaques are only like a foot away from the ceiling, so the plaques are like 8-9 foot high. There's a very famous photo of some guys in one of the warehouses at Johnstons, and they're trying to move stuff, but you can see they're up to their hips in water, and there's barrels and bales floating around them. So very, very dodgy job to have to do during that, but you have to try and save the stock, just in case. But the very fact that there was all the machinery from one of the mills in the hills ended up 9 miles away from the mill tells you the force of the water. The Bishop Mill Bridge had only been up there for like 9 years, and it was described as being a tangled mass of metal at the bottom of the hill the day after the floods started to go down. So, yeah, it was mental. I mean, yes, we have had bad floods, but the 1829 one is the worst we've ever had. Touch wood. It's the only one we'll ever have at those levels, hopefully. But yeah, that's why I moved up to the top of the hill. But yeah, you look at Randolph's Leap. Yeah, there's a fair amount of water goes through it normally. But some bits don't actually look that deep. But when you think the water rose 50 foot, that's the current pathway, pretty much, would have been swamped, swept away in places. If you were to equate the same water level, if it had stayed at 50 foot and the rest of Murray came up to meet it, that would be halfway up the steps on Lady Hill. It'd be halfway up the height of the 2 towers at Elgin Cathedral. It's a hell of a lot of water. So yes, I was sorely disappointed by my research today, because basically all I could find was adverts for the clothes. Although I did find a rather humorous advert for a Johnstons cashmere hot water bottle via Harvey Nicks at £115 for a hot water bottle made in Elgin. Okay, it's got a cashmere cover, but it's still a hot water bottle. Yes, I have done that when we've had like 3-4 days rain before it, and it's because of the way it passes through the land there, it's damn scary at the best of times. I would have hated to seen it as it was. I know there is a sketch, you know, the big bridge that goes over the River Findhorn, and it looks like half of it's dry most of the time when you go over it. There's a sketch of the same view from a different bridge, but the same view in the same place. And all that empty dry bit that we're used to seeing is nothing but water. All you can see is water and a couple of tufts of trees sticking up out the top of the water. It's only like the top 2 foot of the pine trees was visible. Everything else, gone. It was crazy. And if you look at it on the scale of the town, Elgin history. Yeah, Jennifer, I bought a pair of gloves out of there years ago when I worked there on staff discount. And even with staff discount, they were £45 for a pair of gloves. Yeah, Jennifer's just telling us that they sell cashmere dressing gowns that cost £1,000. I wouldn't be surprised. And they probably wouldn't last that long when you're dossing about your house. In theory, hopefully, because they've been done traditionally, they would last longer. But it's a thinner, finer fabric than you would have with your Tesco goonie. So it might not last quite as long as your Tesco goonie. So, but yeah. So next time you feel like having a wedge about the flood alleviation stuff, have a think about how that one. Because when the 1829 flood came through, Johnstons was the only thing there at that end of town. There was a few houses around it, not many. But at the end of the flood, Johnstons was the only thing that was still there. Everything around it had been wiped out. So everything from the back of the cathedral to Calcutt's was wiped out with the water. But if you combine that in the town's history, so you've got that massive flood in 1829. You've got the mop up, the clean up, the rebuild. And then in the 1840s, everybody got cholera. So in the 1800s, the population of Elgin took a fair beating. And it seriously reduced the population. It does say it in one of the books, but I couldn't find the quote as to how many died. One of the books does have a death toll. I think it's the Lauder one. It has the death toll from the flood. But 188 people in Forres alone left destitute, not even a bloody blanket to keep them warm. Left with nothing. So, yeah. And I've just noticed my YouTube playlist has kind of tapped into the depressing everybody's lost everything bit with that REM Everybody Hurts. So, yeah. If and when I manage to get a hold of a copy of the book, I will probably do another chat on just the flood. But I felt I had to include it there because when we get visitors at the cathedral who have been to Johnstons, the one thing that sticks in their mind is how high up the wall the flood markers are. So I had to include the flood in the Johnstons talk. So now we're getting to the end of the scheduled ones, or the ones that I had added to the schedule, because I was hoping lockdown would be finished. But I will be adding more to the schedule for the talks and more to the schedule for the card nights. So, for those of you that are only interested in the card side of things, I will apologise now, but I am only doing Oracle cards and things like that in the White Witch page at the moment, because when I do a connection with you, if your mind is in bits with stress and worry and everything else, it puts me into that same boat. And at the moment, because so many people out there are stressed to death and back, I apologise, but I'm not taking the risk of it getting onto me. So that's why I'm doing oracle cards rather than connections with people on the White Witch page. So, but the next oracle card session is with my comedy cards. So do not come into the next card session unless you have your sense of humour engaged. Because it's random, silly things like, oh, clean your room, and by the way, you smell. So, but feel free to join it if you want to have a laugh, because there's quite a few cards in that deck. Scott's just put up, I think it was the Northern Scot the other day, someone found a letter that a lady wrote back in the 1800s. Can't remember which times, when she stayed in Academy Street, pleading for help and money. Could have been 1840s, yeah. Yeah, 1840s is when cholera hit Elgin, late 1840s. So, because 1840, we all got street taps, 1 tap per street was when we first had running water. But it came off of the water table. It wasn't really the water table, it was groundwater. So basically runoff from the surface. But because the high street had communal pigsties, horses instead of cars, and you didn't actually have plumbing in your house, so you had Gardalu with a minimum of 20 families per street, plus the pigs. Yeah, everybody got cholera, and that killed 3 out of every 5 people. So after the populations recovered from the flood, cholera then took 3 out of every 5 people. So, which is not good, because if you work it out, right, 3 out of 5 people, that's 60% of the population. 60%, 60 people out of 100 dropping dead, all in a matter of a few weeks. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. And that's why a fair few of them ended up in communal graves, which we do have around Elgin, but most people aren't aware of. Because most people, present company accepted, don't listen to the old stories from back then, and they don't read the books, which is why I do it. Because information like this, stories, the folks, the people's stories, the town stories, they need to be handed down. Everybody's interested in Native American history, Egyptian history, and stuff like that. Why? Because you only know little bits. Because their language is indecipherable. You can't understand hieroglyphics, so you have to ask somebody. You can't understand the different themes of music that Native American tribes produce. Each tribe had its own sound. They had their own crops, which were particular to that tribe, and so on and so forth. And it's because we have these little teeny bits of knowledge, we get interested in them. But when it's on your doorstep, most people don't even notice it. Those of you that have been on my tours, how many bits and pieces have I pointed out to you that you never saw before, but you've walked past about 60 times? Look around you when you're out for your daily wander, if you're doing your daily wander. Look around you, see what there is in your neighbourhood. If there's nothing to see, have a look on the maps. There's some fantastic bits and pieces in pretty much every town, anywhere in the world. There's some fantastic connections to the history around you all the time that most of us don't notice. So if you've run out of stuff to do, you can even involve the kids, right? I've looked up online, I've seen there's an old well here, let's go and find it. Stuff like that, you know. You can do it as a solo project, or you can drag the kids with you. It's an excuse to get out for a wander, isn't it? There's a hoosey across from Maryhill Health Centre and across from Old Luigi's Chippy. The Provost's house. Yeah, Scott says he thinks it was the mayor's house. 2 street lamps up the path to the doors that we learned about in primary school, but it was that long ago. He probably can't remember because he's put a laughing face. That's the Provost's house. He was the Provost of Elgin, the one that lived there, and those posts were put up in the 1800s because they thought he was a fantastic provost and yada yada. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but those are the Provost's lampposts, and that was the Provost's house. Now, the deal with them is whoever buys the house now is not responsible for the upkeep of the lampposts. The upkeep of the lampposts is the responsibility of Moray District Council, which is why they don't get painted until they look like they're falling apart. Yes, good point, Barry. The maps on the Canmore website are fantastic for looking up old stuff in your area, changes in your street, and things like that. If you look on Canmore, you'll see basically all of Elgin Town Centre, half of Bishop Mill, and half of New Elgin are actually protected historical areas. And even just that, it's like, okay, what's on my street? Nothing of interest, but it is a protected historic area. So that leads you on to the question of why, which will lead you on to some research. So Canmore site's good for the maps and stuff. You can also use the Arkhams website. It's RCHAMS or something like that. I just call it the Arkham site. You can find historic records on that. If you're looking for something within Moray, go through the Moray District Council website onto the Libraries tab, and then you'll see Lib Index. You can do a place search on your house, your address. You can do a people search if you know somebody who you're interested in researching, and it'll bring up what results they have in the town archives for the place or the person. I had somebody ask me once they had a family member that they didn't even know about until this family member had passed, and they had been looking for months, couldn't find anything. I went onto LibIndex, found an article from the Northern Scot in 2 minutes. So, yeah. If there's a place you want to hear about, if it doesn't become one of the scheduled talks, do some digging yourself. Because we all have the internet, otherwise you wouldn't be able to hear me right now. You can do search online. There's all sorts of different sites. Another tip is when you can't find what you're looking for in an online basis, when you do your search on Google, you'll get all images, shopping, blah, 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 across the top. At the end of that list, there's like 3 wee dots. If you click on the 3 wee dots, it'll bring up books, among other things. Select books, and then you will be able to read books that mention the item, the place, the person, the topic. Some of my research that I've done for these, I have done via Google Books. And through Google Books, I've been able to read books that are stored in the Bodleian down south. I've been able to read stuff that's in the New York State Library, in the library at Yale, Harvard, the Chicago University Library. So use Google Books as well when you're doing research. And remember, first rule of research. Freddie says this happened at such and such a place. Billy says it happened at such and such a place, but Jimmy agrees with Freddie. Make sure you find 3 sources before you count it as fact. Because there's a lot of stuff that will be like, oh, yeah, this happened. And then you don't find mention of it anywhere else. Take that one with a pinch of salt. If you can find it on 3 different sources, 3 different websites, 3 different books, you can count it as fact. Wee bit common sense, that's all that is. Right, what's going on the ghost tour page? Yeah, exactly, Heike. 60% of the population died in the space of a matter of weeks, and everybody's scared of this virus. Yeah, okay, we have good reason to be scared. You don't know what's fact or what's fiction, but do you really want to take the risk? I bloody don't, I'll tell you that. Scott says he lives in Forest now, and on Titler Street, or Titler Street, I never know how I'm supposed to pronounce that one either. There's new build, but it used to be called Station Road, with the train station, which was on the now bypass, but at the top of the road near Victoria Hotel. In the middle of the road, there's a row of what looks like big round studs in the middle of the road that are just visible, but not a clue what they are. Ooh. Yeah, I would use libindex and such like and do a place search with the street name, both the current one and the previous street name, and see what libindex comes up with would be where I would start. Even if it just gives you a mention like, I don't know, say they call them Napoleon studs. It gives you an option of then looking up Napoleon studs elsewhere to see what you can find. Research is all about cross-referencing. So if you don't know what it's called, find something that's going to give you a clue as to what it's called. I think I've noticed these studs, but it would be one of these when we're driving through Forest at like 4 o'clock in the morning, so nobody's awake enough to ask. But if it pops up in any of the other stuff that I'm doing, I will give you a shout, Scott. Because that is another odd one. I know if you look at the plain stones in Elgin, there's some stones that form a line rather than in the plain stones bit, they form a line. When the Hanoverian army passed through Elgin en route to Culloden, they complained about the amount of, how do we put this politely? Excrement is how we put it politely, that was in the street. And they ordered the infantrymen, the foot soldiers, to build a stepping stone pathway along Elgin High Street so the officers didn't ruin their boots in the ankle-deep excrement that was lying there, which was a normal state of affairs for Elgin during the 16 and 1700s. Ankle-deep everywhere you go. That's why the Giles Church has boot scrapers. Even though the Giles Church isn't actually that old, but you'll see a lot of houses have boot scrapers beside their doors as well, and that's why. Because wherever you went in Elgin through the 16 and 1700s, you were wading through up to 5 inches of shit. From people and pigs and horses and anything else that happened to be passing through too. So you make me wonder everybody got cholera. I'm surprised anybody survived, to be honest. So when you see things like Outlander and, oh, isn't it romantic? Just be glad you've not got smell-o-vision. That's why everybody carried around the little posies and the little hankies that they keep going, because they were filled with pleasant herbs so that your system was not disturbed by the god-awful smell from the street and the people. Right, that's 7:58. I will love yous and leave yous. I will pop up the day after tomorrow with my comedy cards. So remember to have your sense of humour engaged. And I will see you then. Take care of you. Look after those that you have to care for. But make sure that everyone with you stays safe. See you when I see you.